Welcome to another episode of On the Issues with Alon Ben-Meir. Today's guest is Yaakov Katz, a journalist, author, and senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. His latest book, co-authored with Amir Bohbot, is While Israel Slept: How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. In this episode, Alon and Yaakov discuss Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza and the quote-unquote Trump factor that has emerged in the peacemaking process. The need for a political, not just military, process in finding an end to the Gaza war and ultimately the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. How to bring both peoples back toward a mindset where peace could be possible, and the lack of leadership on both sides in being willing to make concessions to make real change possible.
Good afternoon, Yaakov. You are in Israel now. I guess it's 5 o'clock there. No. What
Eight,
I'm saying is eight. It's eight
eight
o'clock.
o'clock. Yes.
Yeah, well, here it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We are freezing. The temperature is 16 degrees.
I
I'm in my country home. I want to thank you, first of all, Yaakov, for taking the time to have this discussion with me to have this podcast about very, very important issue that faces Israel and the Palestinians. And for that matter, I think many Jews around the world as well are affected by what's going on. My first question, we want to focus today on the Trump's 20-point peace plan. I'd like to ask you first, what is your general take on this plan? Where do you think it's going to go with it?
Well, Alon, first, let me just say it's a pleasure to be with you. And for the years that I was the editor of the Jerusalem Post, it was always a pleasure to publish your writings and your columns and to be able to share them with a
Thank you.
wider audience. So it's great to now have this opportunity to be in conversation. You know, the Trump 20-point plan, while very ambitious and very impressive, and I would say in the detail and how expansive it is, and the process that they went through to create it. I don't know, where do I stand on it is less of the issue personally, but it's just more of how do I view its potential to succeed? Because when I look
Yes,
at the reality on the ground and I look at where we are now, about 3, 4 months almost after the ceasefire went into effect and the 20 living
right,
hostages walked out of
right,
Gaza. And we divided Gaza essentially into the yellow zone, which is controlled by Israel, and the red zone, or what you have, whatever it's called, which is controlled by Hamas. Hamas
right,
today is in control of half of Gaza. Hamas today is back to the level of force power that it had before, maybe not with the same capabilities, but a similar force. Hamas is recouping its lost money and resources, putting a tax on cargo and supplies and aid that's sent into Gaza. And Hamas is not disappearing, and there's no indication that it is going to disarm. And without that happening, any possibility of a long-term resolution here or ability to change reality is something that's very difficult to imagine. But, and this is the great caveat, with all that said, what Donald Trump has been able to achieve until now has been remarkable. What Donald Trump has been able to achieve has been against all odds and predictions. And therefore, it is very possible that his belief in the Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians and his reliance on them to be able to potentially deliver Hamas might be what's actually going to make this work. So I always say whenever something involves Trump, you can't ignore the Trump factor, because what we would have looked at in the past as being the conventional thinking doesn't usually apply when Donald Trump is a piece of that equation.
Well, you mentioned several very important points. But let me start with the initial one, that is Hamas. Hamas, according to this plan, is supposed to disarm, and I think they have reconstituted themselves, nevertheless, not to the same extent that they were before. So Netanyahu's objective to destroy Hamas completely before withdrawing, before even accepting a ceasefire, has not been achieved.
Right.
So that's number one. Then the question is whether or not Hamas will disarm and relinquish its administrative also authority in Gaza, half of Gaza today. What's going to take? That is the bigger question. You have raised it, and I think it's an extremely important question. What is going to take? Who is going to disarm them? Under what circumstances they'll be disarmed? And so far, I have not seen any concerted effort from anywhere that begin the process. There may be some negotiation behind the scene with Hamas, but I don't see any process beginning to disarm Hamas. So that's one thing. Now, if you were to ask me, okay, what is going to take, I will come to that question. That is, what is going to take, in fact, to disarm Hamas? I have some views on the subject. And one last thing I want to say, and that is, yes, Trump has significant influence in Israel, and the Israeli public trust. They like Trump. They love Trump, for that matter. I think my assumption is correct. But we also have seen Trump vacillating, changing his position. Many of the things he've said, he reversed himself time and again. That's one thing. And over the so many years since the occupation began, you know very well how many conferences, how much negotiation have taken place in so many different cities around in Europe, in Israel itself, at Camp David, name it. Sometimes we thought, oh, the major progress has been achieved, but in the end, nothing came out of it. I'm not pessimistic, but these are realities. Now the question, what has in fact changed where you feel somewhat more optimistic this time around?
Well, look, I definitely feel more optimistic, partially or mainly because there's a number of factors. Number one is it is impossible to ignore that Hamas, while it has reconstituted itself, while it is reestablishing its capabilities, and while it is replenishing its bank accounts and its pockets, it has been degraded. Israel has changed the equation. Israel is no longer a believer in a containment policy, and Israel is responding forcefully to every Hamas act of aggression. At the same time, though, so I want to believe that from a military perspective and a doctrine standpoint of our new defense doctrine, we will not go back to the position of where we stand on a border and we just look across and hope everything will be okay. We will not go along that way anymore. But we also see in the 20-point plan, and this gives me optimism, is very deep involvement by the Arab world taking responsibility for Gaza, maybe for the first time, and of the so-called Board of Peace and Executive Committee and all these other different layers of different entities that include not just Palestinians and not just Arabs, but also Europeans and other countries around the world. There is an international consolidation unlike anything we have seen before to want to keep Gaza quiet, rehabilitated, rebuilt, and stable. That international investment, and specifically that Arab investment, the United Arab Emirates, for example, saying we want to take responsibility for civilian affairs. Egypt's engagement now, the Rafah crossing reopening between Egypt and Gaza. I think that shows me that there is a deep engagement, and I think that is something that gives me hope. Now, again, if Hamas doesn't give up its weapons and Hamas doesn't remove itself from power, then we face basically two options. One is Israel will have to do it, and that means a further war at some point along the way. Or two is that we are just going to have to come to terms with this reality. And for now, we kick the can down the road for a specific period of time, but nothing that's really going to last. Because Hamas is not alone, and I think you know this, Hamas is not going to just change its colors.
Well, exactly that, but then we also have to remember 2 years of onslaught on Hamas, it has not destroyed Hamas. So when you say if Hamas does not disarm, then Israel will take charge and will have to destroy Hamas. I am not sure. I'm not sure that military force is going to do the job at this point in time. And I have a perhaps radical view on this matter. And I really think that, historically speaking, when you look at various conflicts around the world over the centuries, over the decades, when you have resistance movement, be that violent one at that, if you want to reach an agreement, you cannot merely demand disarm and get the hell out of here, but you want to perhaps incorporate them, invite them to become part of the peace process. In my view, however distasteful this might be to Israelis, specifically after October 7th, will they really ever contemplate that Hamas be part and parcel of a negotiating process that is a peace process? In my view, if we want to accelerate the process and give Trump a chance, an opportunity to really realize it and move along, Hamas will have to be part and parcel of this peace process. That is, using force to disarm Hamas, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Moreover, one last thing I want to say here, during this ceasefire, I just wrote a column on this matter. Israel continued, contrary to the ceasefire terms, been bombarding Gaza. Nearly 3,000 units has been in an structure been destroyed. 520 Palestinians were killed. And so, when you look at this, the Rafah crossing was open, but the situation on the ground remained extremely tense, given the fact that the de facto the ceasefire has not been really holding. So we have to begin with that process. And the Trump administration, I have not heard one word coming from the Trump administration saying to Israel, enough is enough. You cannot continue this bombardment and this killing of Palestinians under the guise of a ceasefire. So how do you balance these things, given where we stand today, in the context of this 20-point plans?
I don't agree with everything you just said, Alon. I agree with. I can't say that I agree with the comment of Hamas being part of a future Palestinian government, but we could talk about that. But I do agree that and to me, this was the greatest mistake that Israel made in this war, was this attempt to sell a fantasy to the people by the government of Israel that military operations alone would be enough to win the war. From the beginning, it was obvious. And, there's Clausewitz and there's so many other military theorists, and we don't have to go back to, hundreds of years, but that military action is politics by other means. But then, in other words, you need a political process at the end here. And the political process was always going to be some sort of Palestinian entity that was going to control the Gaza Strip and was going to rebuild. Now, with the involvement of the world, whether you called it the Board of Peace, the Executive Committee, this machine, that machine, it doesn't make a difference. Israel refused to engage in any of that. Israel refused to entertain that publicly, to talk about it. You and I could have sat on this Zoom, maybe not October 7th, maybe not October 8th, maybe November 8th. And we could have said pretty much what the contours and the outlines would be of what this resolution would look like. Now, why did that cause us damage, in my view? Is because it did three things. Number one, it was misleading. Number two, it created an expectation that was never going to be met. So when you sold the public, you being Netanyahu, sold the public on this idea, what he called in Hebrew, nitzachon muchlat, or total victory, it was never going to be possible. But people who I see on the streets genuinely believed that it was possible to reach the total victory. And now they're looking and they're broken. How did this happen? Well, what do you mean, how did this happen? It was always going to happen. But number three, and this is so those two maybe I could forgive. But number three is that we wasted time. And within these 2 years, we being the world, could have worked to create the infrastructure needed, to facilitate the new entity, to train the forces that would need to come in. In other words, we could have used this time to work towards that goal. And why did this not happen alone? And you know the answer just as well as I do. This did not happen because of purely domestic Israeli politics.
Exactly. And that hasn't changed. And that's the point here. That is, this government today, with the Smotrich there and with Ben-Meir is there and Netanyahu himself, have and will continue to resist any kind of, even the mention of a Palestinian state along the line someplace, which is mentioned in a Trump 20-point plan somewhere along the line. If things work out, then perhaps we get to that role. But what you said, when Netanyahu said total victory, and he certainly did not achieve a total victory against Hamas, what makes you think he is going to be able to achieve total victory now if Hamas continued to resist disarming itself? So what I'm saying, another point we have to remember, historically, when there were some elections within the Palestinians, going back to 2007, to this day, Hamas remains a very popular movement within the Palestinian national movement. So if you were to hold an election today, free and fair election, I am not sure that the Palestinian Authority or moderate Palestinians are necessarily going to win. This Hamas remains not just a resistant movement, but is a political movement as well. It's a political movement. And that is, surely, the atrocities they have committed are unforgivable. But then again, if we take that, Yaakov, out of context, and that's perhaps many Israelis will resent me for saying something, perhaps they think it's awful to say. But the October 7 attack cannot be taken totally out of context. That is, remember, this is 57 years of occupation. 90% of Palestinians have been living under occupation. 90% born after 1967. So when you think in terms of how much longer they can resist, how much more they can suffer, how much more they can endure, you have to admit that the occupation for so long, with no hope, and this is very important, there is no hope. The Palestinians came to the conclusion that Israel is not going to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. So they were hopeless in that regard. So Hamas acted. Surely it was barbaric, unacceptable under any circumstances. But what they have done is change the dynamics. Remember what happened. What Israel has done with its invasion of Gaza and the horrific casualties and destruction that have taken place, the international community was up in arms. Countries began, Western countries recognized the Palestinian state. Of course, it didn't mean much unless they act on it. But the Hamas attack and Israeli retaliatory war, which really quickly transferred to revenge and retribution, and getting rid of the Palestinians altogether if they could, has changed the dynamics today. What Trump has done, yes, he's coming now to capitalize on the changing dynamics, but then you have to take it piece by piece and see, is it moving along? You mentioned commitment of the Arab state, commitment of the international community, but I've yet to see a group actually emerging. So far, no countries are prepared to, other than Turkey perhaps, to contribute to the peacekeeping force in Gaza. So the obstacle remains so massive. I mean, I would love to see an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on a two-state solution. It's been my dream for 50 years. I've been talking about that. But I don't see how this is going to materialize given the circumstances today on the ground.
Look, I mean, we could talk for hours alone about the past and who's to blame and why we are where we are, right? We probably disagree, you and I, whether it was the so-called occupation, whether it's Palestinian intransigence and terrorism, whether it's leadership in Israel, leadership in the Palestinian territories. To me, it makes less of a difference right now, because what makes the most difference now is that how do we break this cycle and how do we get out of it? And how do we move forward from here to a point that Israelis have hope and security, and that Palestinians have hope and security as well? And right now, neither side has either of that.
That's right.
So to me, that's what's missing in the entire debate of this issue is how do we find a way for both sides to get what they want. You know, I was talking with a Palestinian friend recently who said to me, look, the conflict is very simple. For Israelis, it's about security. For Palestinians, it's about freedom. And I kind of laughed because I said, I don't see it that way. There's too many people on the Palestinian side that don't just want freedom. They don't want Israel. And there's also too many people on the Israeli side that don't want to give Palestinians that freedom.
Actually, the majority.
Well,
Right, the majority.
At this point, most Israelis do not believe
Yeah.
in the prospect of a two-state solution 100%, right? And by the way, that's unfortunate. And I wonder sometimes how can we ever get back to a place that Israelis will feel that that is possible?
Okay, let's take it from there. You know, look at the public narratives that Netanyahu, specifically going back nearly 20 years consistently. What was Netanyahu's narrative consisted of? That the Palestinians pose existential danger to Israel. Now look at the 78 years now since the Israeli-Palestinian conflict began in 1948. Don't you think Israeli relation with the Palestinians today has reached a new nadir, a new low after 78 years? So what was the progress? Israel can say we built settlement, we expanded in the West Bank, we have made significant gains, but there is no peace, and the relationship between the two sides is its worst that has ever been. So what you're saying then, the Israelis bought into the argument that the Palestinians pose existential danger to Israel. Do you really believe that? I mean, Israel has such a military might. Look what happened in the Second Intifada. They challenged Israel, went to Israel, and basically wiped out whatever on its way. What happened subsequently? The Palestinian Authority accepted Israel's right to exist, and they began sort of some kind of normalization of relationship. I'm saying is, this notion that the Palestinian pose an existence to Israel is not valid. It's baseless. Yes, there are many Palestinians who still would like to see Israel wiped out, but they also know this is not going to happen. It's going to be impossible. So what I'm saying, and I'm preaching now, I said, okay, you don't think the Palestinians want peace? They want a state of their own? Why not challenging them? Why not, for example, the government would say, I'm willing to sit down and negotiate a two-state solution unconditionally. Come to the table. Why not challenge the Palestinians? And why not tell the Hamas, if you disarm and recognize Israel in principle as right to exist, you also can come to, do we need a radical approach to change the dynamics or we don't? So, and I'm not talking about the past. I'm talking about the present.
Look, I think that for the current situation, one of the ways that we can potentially bring the Israeli people back into believing in this is there's a number of things that have to happen. One of them is we need to have a result of this war where the Israeli people are in trauma still and are still scarred and are still wounded, feel that not only did they win the war, but also that Hamas definitively lost the war. And that we currently do not have. Now, that will come maybe through this political process. That's piece one. Piece two will include, obviously, the rehabilitation and rebuilding of Gaza and hopefully the de-radicalization. So the moment that you have a new education system and a new cultural infrastructure and children who are not taught to want to kill Israelis, that will also give Israelis the confidence once again. But there's a third piece to it. And the third piece is leadership in Israel that is willing to take the bold step of saying to the Israeli people, we cannot continue in the current route, right? We have to shift. Now, right now, there's no one in the Israeli political landscape except for Yair Golan, the leader of the Democrats Party, as they call it, which is, you know, the merger of Meretz and Labor. There is no one in Israel of any of the politicians, definitely not on the right, but even on the left, Naftali Bennett the center left, Yair Lapid, Gadi Eisenkot, Lieberman, no one is talking about this. If anything, they talk about we will never give the Palestinians a state. So no one is giving Israelis a vision of an alternative.
Exactly. Exactly, Yaakov. This is the point. There is no leaders today in Israel that support a solution-based, a peace with the Palestinian based on a two-state. They don't exist. But let's speak about in the context of this peace plan, Trump peace plan. What is going to take? We're talking about relationship, animosity, hatred, intense hatred between the two sides, lack of trust, completely zero trust between the two sides. So if this plan is to work, you're going to need also another process that he's not talking about in this plan. You need a process to reconcile differences between the two sides, starting today, starting when the ceasefire was agreed upon. It's a process whereby they reconcile one another. What Israel is doing, what Netanyahu is doing, is keep bombarding Gaza. Yes, Hamas has been violating occasionally the ceasefire, but what is happening, instead of starting a process of reconciliation, to tell the world as well as to the Palestinian, look, we are ready. That does not exist, nor is there leadership in Israel that is willing to engage in this kind of process. The Netanyahu government, which potentially could win again, comes in the election, is dead set on never Palestinian state. So where do you see any kind of hope unless we revolutionize the whole process? And one more last word I want to say to you, Yaakov. 1 year before the October 7th, I wrote a piece, and I said then, 11 months before that, another explosion is going to happen. It's only a question of when. I wasn't a prophet, and I said it will make the second intifada looks like a child's play. Those are my words. 11 months, and I'm not saying, I know it all. What I'm saying is, like you, I simply was reading what's on the ground. And I said, an explosion is inevitable, just inevitable. So we need a point of departure, Yaakov.
It's hard for me to give you a clear answer because I don't know. I think definitely I can speak for the Israeli side. It's hard for me to speak for what's going to happen on the Palestinian side. And yes, I do put most of the blame on the Palestinian side. I think that if the Palestinians went about this differently, Israelis would be going about this differently as well. Now, it's like the chicken and egg, or it's who's to blame. The blame game won't help us. What I look at, though, is that Israelis historically have consistently tried to engage with the Palestinians and have consistently expressed willingness and readiness to make concessions, only to always be betrayed. Now, forget about the details for a moment. For the Israeli people, and it really will have to come with a dramatic change within society here. And at the moment, it doesn't look like it's something that's in the cards. If this Trump peace plan can bring that stability, that security, and that prosperity, because let's be honest, it does give Israel a lot of leeway when it comes to security. Israel's security is very much guaranteed. Then it would be something that I think if they are able to make that movement, if they are able to disarm Hamas, if they are able to change education system in Gaza and the likes, this would make it much more difficult for Israel to consistently say no in the future when they are asked to make changes of their own.
Yeah, you said earlier that Israel has reached out time and again. Well, I don't think that, with all due respect, in the last 17, 18 years, Netanyahu has said it time and again and again and again, there will be no Palestinian state under his watch, and there was made no progress in that way. The other thing is we have to think, when you talk about Israel's ultimate national security, and I'm sure you probably unique to know this, what precipitated October 7th? Was it just Hamas, an opportunity? You know the reports we've been hearing. Netanyahu has been funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas. The Mossad knew only too well the massive network of tunnels being built. That was known. The chief of military intelligence for Egypt told Netanyahu, there is a problem. We sense there is a problem. The observers of what's going on. So the Israeli government knew in advance that something awful is going to happen. And that did not move Netanyahu to do a damn thing about it. The opposite. He withdrew some forces from the border with Gaza to the West Bank, to Jerusalem. So when you talk Israel, we can't emphasize Israel's security. Yes, I think Israel's security is of paramount importance. But is it really? When you say we have reached out, shouldn't the more powerful, be able to reach out and say, we are ready to sit down. Are you willing to sit down? Why not challenge them and go back to the same promise? So what I'm saying here, if this plan is going to work, given how Israeli government still behaves today, with a lack of leadership in other than Netanyahu in Israel to move the needle, what is the real prospect of making real
But
peace?
Alon, I could say the same thing about the Palestinians. With
But
Hamas still in charge
that
of
doesn't
Gaza and
justify.
Abu Mazen still in charge of the West Bank, what's going to
This is
change
this,
there
this
either?
is true, but to put the onus on the Palestinian only, that is not what's going to happen. I think both are guilty of similar charges, so to speak. Both have come to the conclusion, to the reality that the current state of affair is not sustainable. What Trump is doing is to change the dynamic. I hope he succeeds, but I don't see the element put properly in place in order to move that in a manner that is going to make a real change in the next 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months. Again, Hamas is still with arms. Israel continued to bombard Gaza, even interrupting aid against the peace accord. No peacekeeping forces being put together. There's so many things haven't taken place yet. I wish this could move further, better, and reach some kind of a conclusion. I still feel rather pessimistic about this unless there is a dramatic shift in policy, both by Israel as well as the Palestinians.
The shift in policy is 100% needed on both sides, and that's my point, is that unless we have that dramatic change on both sides, nothing is going to change. And I think there at least we can agree. Who the blame goes to is of less importance in my view. What's more important is how do we get to this point that both sides, both peoples believe in the prospect and the possibility that it can be different. For that to happen, because either way you look at it, Alon, and you know this you've been working on this for decades, any way you look at this, both sides will be asked to make painful concessions and to pay a painful price.
Exactly.
Some will have to take risks. Some will have to give up desires. Some will have to walk away from ideas that they once believed in. It doesn't make a difference, but it will be painful. For that to happen, you have to have a leader who's explaining to you how you get there and why you should get there. And at the moment, neither of us have the leadership that is required for that to happen.
Exactly.
Now, as an Israeli, I am traumatized by October 7th. I am scarred. And I have very little belief in the realism or the prospect of real change on the side of Hamas or the Palestinian Authority for that matter. But I can recognize that they too look at us today and say something very similar.
Yeah, listen, this is true, but after Israeli retaliation that killed so many, destroyed so much, the world forgotten about October 7 altogether. What's here, the disproportionality in Israeli reaction, many people label this as a genocide, has really usurped from Israel its moral high ground. Israel today stand on the defensive in the eyes of the international community, whether we like it or not. I think this is a reality. But let me go to the point that you mentioned earlier. That is, what is needed, leadership. Well, we don't have leadership today. How this leadership going to emerge? Just take one thing, look at the peace plan, and let's change one element in it. Instead of stop mentioning a potential Palestinian state. Imagine if Trump, who been stating two-state solution just himself, like every administration going back from day one.
Right.
Imagine if this peace plan said, the idea here to establish two-state solution, that is going to be the starting point. Now we have to build a process. Imagine how much that would have changed in terms of where the Palestinians stand, even where Hamas stand today. If that was the premise, if they knew, Trump plan is to begin with we need to start with the premise that there will be a Palestinian state. Now let's work out the details. It takes 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, but we have to remain committed to that process. That will have changed the dynamics as well, but we don't have that. What makes you think the Palestinian would ever believe, Trump or Israel or anyone else, that the dynamics are going to change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Trump factor, which we kind of opened up our conversation with, is really the key here. We're seeing that play out not just when it comes to Gaza, but also with Iran right now, and what will come of that standoff between the United States and the Iranians. Trump has really proven with his out-of-the-box style and his approach to diplomacy to be someone who is capable of achieving what people who have been doing this for decades were not able to achieve. That is the key here. That is very difficult for people, I think, for any of us to predict where it will go and how it will play out, right? And I think that for many people, looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we tend to stay stuck to some extent in the boxes of the last, 35 years, let's say, pretty much since Oslo. But Trump changes that equation and changes the balance. And whether it's to the benefit of Israel, to the benefit of the Palestinians, the benefit of both sides, less of relevance to the point that he does have the ability to shake things up in a way that other people did not. And his unpredictability, which is his greatest asset, does limit even this government and Israel's ability to try and manipulate the situation. And by the way, the same can be said about the Palestinians, right? The fact that this is Trump, his close relationship with the Qataris and the Turks, the genuine fear, I think, that exists by Hamas of what he would do if he does not get his way, all is part of the puzzle in what makes this possible.
Yeah, but it's interesting you mentioned Qatar and Turkey, that Israel vehemently opposed to and resist. They should take no part in any of this process, specifically Turkey, if not Qatar in particular, but Qatar as well. But we sort of, I think we're making a huge deal out of these 20. In reality, there's a ceasefire, which is tenuous even now. It's a ceasefire. How much has been built on it so far, 3.5 months later? So Trump, he's speaking grandiose, he's the only one who can produce peace. He's the only one who can do the impossible. But the reality is he achieved a ceasefire. He pressured the government of President Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire against the wishes of his government, against the wishes of his minister. He had to accept that. But I hear, not rumors, I hear people close to the government who say, this is tactic. Knowing Netanyahu will find a way, any hope possible, any opportunity to torpedo that. when the time comes, because he also know that the Trump pretty much, I don't want to say Trump in his pocket, but Israel influence in the United States and on this administration is massive, is substantial. I don't see how Trump is going to eventually put his foot down against Israel and say, you have to do that. When politically here, see, Israel is a domestic problem in the United States. It's not just a foreign problem, foreign issue. So he needs the support of the evangelicals. He needs the support of many other groups that support Israel blindly. He is not going to be able to say to Israel, you have to do this, you have to do that. And now what he's doing, Israel is committing these still crimes in Gaza, not a single word coming from the White House saying, you have to stop that because you are undermining the ceasefire.
It could be because they don't look at it like you do, Alon, that it's a war crime in Gaza, right? Which is also the way I look at it. But, that might be the case. They don't see what you see as being the war crime. They see it as a country acting in self-defense of itself.
Well, but they convinced themselves, just like Netanyahu convinced himself, we are acting in self-defense when he perhaps precipitated the October 7 indirectly.
I don't think Netanyahu precipitated the October 7th.
Indirectly, he made it possible, I think, for Hamas to contemplate something of such magnitude. He gave them the tools, Yaakov. He gave them the tools.
No one wanted in Israel October 7th.
Of course not.
Happen.
Of course
failures were definitely done. I wrote a whole book about it, of the failures that led to that terrible massacre on that morning and this war that then it sparked. But Netanyahu made many mistakes, in my view, of his approach to Hamas, his emboldening of Hamas, the giving Qatari money to Hamas, the containment policy with regards to Hamas, prioritizing other issues and challenges as opposed to Hamas. All very true, but it was never in a way to allow October 7th to happen.
Not allow, made it possible, gave them the means to do it, gave them the money, the equipment, the machines, what they produce locally, what they bought in terms of
which
arms,
in the end was done out of a genocidal jihadist motivation and ideology.
But again,
that was what pushed them to do it.
Yeah, nevertheless, look where they are today. And they are still standing.
Yeah, which is the great tragedy and is unfortunate for this war.
They are still standing. And now, as I said, Yaakov, we have to change our approach completely if we want to make any progress in this horrific conflict, the longest since World War II, that has continued for nearly 8 decades now. Where do we go from here if we don't have the courage? That is Israelis themselves. I think the Israeli public here, the Israeli public has to play a role. If the Israeli public, Yaakov, they have gone into the street every Saturday for 6 months, demonstrating hundreds of thousands against the so-called judicial reforms, right? Have you seen 200,000-300,000 Israelis going up to in the streets and say, enough is enough, we have to make peace with the Palestinians?
So no, that's true, right? And that's what we were talking about.
So you need to change the Israeli mindset. You need to change that. And who's going to change if not leadership? And if you don't have leadership, Trump is not going to change their mindset. It's not going to happen. It has to be indigenous.
This part of the need for leadership that will lead the people in a different direction and give them hope and give them a vision, that I agree with.
And that doesn't exist. And we are banking so much on what Trump can do, when in fact you need an indigenous movement from within. If you really want to change in any country, you know this better. I've been saying about Iran. It would be a terrible mistake for the United States to topple the Iranian government. Look what happened in 1953 with the Mossad government. What happened? It brought in 1979 the mullahs to power. A change of this magnitude must come from within, not from without, because it will not be sustained if it is imposed by the United States or by anybody other power. And you don't have that in Israel. So people like you, like me, we have a little tiny little bit of a role to play. We have to appeal to the Israeli public. Do you want to have another 80 years of conflict with the Palestinians? That's really the ultimate question. And it is the Israeli public who only can change the dynamics. If they go on and say enough is enough, we need a solution.
It takes two to tango, Alon, but there's no doubt that I will agree with you, and I've said this before, that we can't always look to the other side and say, let's wait for them to change for us to change. We can't always say it's about them. If we know where we want to go, we have to start going there.
Exactly.
And that we don't have at the moment.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
If Netanyahu is his bunch gang one piece, they would have changed their narrative completely. Just imagine, Yaakov, for a minute, that Netanyahu would come to the Israeli public and said, you know what, we had enough. We have to talk about peace now. He doesn't want to, he can't, he's incapable, because he's not interested in that. He just still have this messianic mission, Greater Israel remain the cornerstone of this government. And they have said it openly and clearly. We have to get rid of every Palestinian man, women, and children. How many times you heard that from various ministers in this current government?
Many, many times.
Yes, many times. You know, I wanted to have the last word, Yaakov.
Please.
I think you've put so much more stuff in Trump peace plan than I do. I would like you just to take a few minutes and revisit, after this conversation, revisit that position. And do you really feel exactly the way you felt? But not because I tried to convince you, I don't think that's not my objective. But do you really feel that this is going to offer some kind of a breakthrough that could change the dynamic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I stick by pretty much what I said in the beginning. I'm skeptical, but I'm also hopeful.
Yes.
I'm skeptical because of just the reality on the ground. What we've spent the last half hour talking about leadership, but I'm hopeful because I do think that what Trump has achieved until now is very impressive. And I think that if there's anyone who can make that dramatic change, it's potentially him. So I will conclude with skepticism and hope at the same time.
Unfortunately, unfortunately, this has been the state of affair
forever.
For so long.
Exactly. Well, some things don't change, Alon.
Well, do we really want to settle on this, Yaakov? Do we really want to accept this reality? I still wanted to have another word. I wanted to have the last word. But I've been saying all along for years, and I haven't changed. Israeli-Palestinian coexistence is irrevocable in one form or another. They must coexist. There are 2 million Palestinians in Israel. There are 2.5, 3 million in the West Bank. There are a couple of millions roughly in Gaza. Israel is surrounded from within and without its border by Palestinians. 7 million of them, equal to the number of the Israeli Jews. So coexistence is inevitable in one form or another. And the Israelis need to ask themselves a simple question, and the Palestinians for that matter. Do we want to kill each other for another 80 years? Or should we accept coexistence as a matter of fact, irrevocable reality, and think in terms of peaceful coexistence instead of killing each other for another 80 years? Just want to last word. It's yours.
I mean, Alon, I agree with you ultimately. With that last line, I totally agree with. That there is no alternative to us finding a way to coexist. We're not going anywhere, and they are not going anywhere.
Exactly.
And that recognition is what needs to lead us to ask ourselves the next question, which is, okay, so what? Do we want to stay in conflict, or do we want to find an alternative?
Right.
We will not find the alternative on our own, and they will not find the alternative on their own. We have to engage. This idea that we can do whatever we want without engaging does not work.
Exactly.
And this idea that they can embrace a radical ideology without paying a price is also not working. So both sides have reached that impasse.
Right.
That is where we need to, I think, build on from there.
That's right. Yaakov, it's been, to say it's been a pleasure, it's an understatement. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think we sort of have imparted something, hopefully, to our listeners. And you are, given who you are, what you've been doing all these years, all the power to you. I know you're going to continue. And thank you so much again for taking the time. And I hope this will not be the first and the last one. We'll have another discussion sometime in the near future. All the best.
Thank you, Alon.
Thank
Great
you
to be
so
with
much.
you.
Thank you. Bye now. Thank you for listening to this episode on the issues. You can find this podcast on my SoundCloud page, and stay tuned to my social media accounts for the latest analysis and announcements.